All right, I want to welcome everyone to AskGAOLive, our GAO, the Government Accountability Office's streaming video chat project. Thank you for tuning in. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. I'm here with Kay Brown, a director in GAO's Education, Workforce, and Income Security team. We're going to be talking about financial exploitation of older Americans and the recent work that GAO has done on that. My name's Jeremy Clucci. I'm in our Office of Public Affairs, and the report that I mentioned that Kay's team released last week is GAO-13-11, -110. It's available on our website, gao.gov. Right on the front page, if you scroll down a bit, you can see it came out on Thursday. So if you need some context, you can find the report there. I also want to talk before we get started about how you can submit questions. We've gotten a few questions over email already. That address is askgaolive@gao.gov. Feel free throughout the chat to send your thoughts and questions to that email address, and we'll do our best to get you a response. If you're on social media, you can also submit questions via Twitter. Use the hashtag AskGAOLive, and we'll be keeping an eye on those tweets as well. So that's another great way to submit a question. So now, Kay, turn to you, and thank you again for joining us.
My pleasure.
To start off, I'm hoping that you can give us some brief background on you and your work at GAO.
Okay. I'm Kay Brown. I'm a director in GAO's Education, Workforce, and Income Security team. As Jeremy said, I've worked at GAO for about 20 years, and all of that time, my focus has been on making government work better for services for vulnerable populations.
Great, thanks. And so now diving into our topic today, financial exploitation of older Americans. Can you give us an introduction to this topic and also GAO's work on it?
Sure. About a year and a half ago, we issued a report on elder abuse that included both all of the different types of abuse, ranging from physical abuse, psychological, sexual, neglect, and elder financial exploitation. And during that work, we decided that the financial exploitation was a particularly vexing problem. So we ended up doing some additional work on that, and that's what our report is about that was issued just last week. To be clear on exactly what we're talking about here, financial exploitation is the illegal or improper use of an elder person's resources, assets, or property. And it can be performed by any number of different individuals. It can be people that the older American trusts, such as a home caregiver, even a relative or a financial advisor, or it could be someone that they do not know, and it takes the form of a scam, often a telephone scam, internet scam, or an email or a mail scam. And this, we think, is a very serious problem for a couple of reasons. One of our goals in this country is to allow older adults to remain in their communities and at home as long as possible. And this type of exploitation robs them of not only their dignity, but often their health and their independence. By independence, I mean that sometimes they can lose all of their financial resources, and with this type of exploitation, it's rare for them to recover those resources. We don't really know how extensive this is, but we found one study that's an estimate that found that about $2.9 billion was lost through this type of exploitation in 2010. So it is a serious problem. The challenge that we have in trying to review a problem like this is that it's multifaceted and multi-layered. It covers things that happen at the local level, and the agencies that would be covering it are local, state, and federal. And we have a graphic that will demonstrate that, because in addition to those three levels of government, we have three different types of systems that can be involved in trying to both identify and address this problem. The first graphic that you can see right there covers, if you look at it starting at 12 o'clock, consumer protection, That's one of the systems involved. Then you move on to criminal justice and social services. Now, those three systems have agencies that are involved at the state and local level, which is our next graphic. And as you can see, starting at 12 o'clock again, you see that the consumer protection is covered by the state insurance, banking, and securities regulators. Criminal justice can involve state and local law enforcement agencies, district attorneys' offices, the state courts, and state attorneys general. In addition, social services are primarily covered by the Adult Protective Services offices, which are found in each community, and then the state units on aging. And you might be familiar with those because they're the offices that are often called the AAAs, or the area agencies on aging, that deliver broader social services to older adults. On the federal level, we have a number of different agencies that also cover the three different systems. Starting with consumer protections again, we have the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and that's the only unit in the federal government that actually has an office whose explicit job is to deal with this kind of problem. It's called the Office of Financial Protection for Older Americans. There's also the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the Department of Treasury. For criminal justice at the federal level, you'll see, of course, there's the Department of Justice, but also the Postal Inspection Service, because many of the scams are conducted through the mail. And then on the social services side, at the Department of Health and Human Services, there is the Administration on Aging. So as you can see, it's a multi-layered problem, both in levels of government and in systems, and many, many agencies are involved, which is why we thought it would be important for us to take a look at it.
Thanks, Kay. To provide some context on this phenomenon, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about why older adults frequently are targeted for exploitation in these cases.
Well, there's two primary reasons. One is that older adults often have more resources. They've had their whole life to save their resources and are preparing or using it in their retirement. The second reason is, as we age, our capacity to be able to identify fraud and manage our resources diminishes. And so these older adults make good targets, frankly.
We have a question here from John. This came in over email. He sent in a story about financial exploitation, and it raises a good question, which is, how can professionals be held responsible in cases of elder abuse, and who can a concerned person contact when they suspect abuse?
That's a good question, John. And of course, as you can tell from the graphics that we showed, there are many different places where you could go to try to report some type of abuse like this. It kind of depends on the kind of abuse that you're talking about. But one place to start is always your local Adult Protective Services office. And if you scroll down below the image on your screen right now, you'll see that we have a website there that you can refer to that has, it will take you to contacts for the Adult Protective Services offices in every state. Now, as far as how professionals can be held accountable, we've seen examples where different professionals have actually lost their license. It might have been an insurance regulator who was found to have conducted some type of improper or illegal exploitation, or it might have been some type of financial advisor. But there are situations where people actually do lose their licenses. I have to say, though, that one of the things that we found is that it's difficult to have these cases go through the criminal justice system for a couple of reasons. At the local level, if they're a simple case and it's a known perpetrator, it would be very possible that the law enforcement and the local district attorney or courts would be willing to step in and try to bring something like this to court. If it's a larger problem that involves something like scams that cross over between states or even international scams, it's much harder for the local jurisdictions to be able to cope with that. And what they end up doing is referring it to the federal level. And at the federal level, this type of infraction may or may not rise to the level that is serious enough for one of the federal agencies like the Department of Justice to take it on. So it does, sometimes there are some cases that are caught in a kind of limbo. We have some recommendations that I can talk about later as far as how that might be fixed. Okay.
Thanks. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the roles that state and local governments and versus the federal government play when it comes to this issue?
Well, the state, technically, the responsibility for protecting older adults lies with the state and local jurisdictions. The federal government has a different kind of role when we have these types of programs that are really state and local programs. In these types of cases, federal agencies are intended to support and provide assistance, and in some cases help with identifying best practices and things like that for the states and locals. In this type of work, we actually identified 7 different federal agencies that have a role in supporting or providing information to the states and local jurisdictions on elder financial exploitation, or, as I mentioned, sometimes bringing some of the larger cases to trial.
We've received questions, a number of questions so far, 2 in particular from Latifa and Carol, and these are related to abuse of guardianship powers. I know this report touches on that issue. Can you talk about that in a little more detail?
Right. This report touches on issues with guardianship, and we also have several other reports that explicitly focus on guardianship, that if you go to the GAO website and search on guardianship, you'll be able to find those reports. The main challenge with guardianship for us, because we work for Congress and can address recommendations to the federal agencies, is that guardians are appointed by state courts. And we have studied this problem, and we know that, first of all, guardians can play very, very important roles in protecting older, vulnerable individuals or others who don't have the capacity to make financial decisions. However, unfortunately, there are situations where guardians do abuse their powers, and we've talked in the past about the need for state courts to be perhaps more careful in how they're selecting their guardians and to do more careful monitoring of how guardians are performing. In the case of this report, what we're talking about is that a couple things. One, background checks. Background checks can be a helpful tool. They're not 100% foolproof, but we have suggested that courts may want to take a look at doing a more thorough background check before they appoint someone as a guardian. The other thing from the federal perspective is we know that with people who receive benefits from things like the Social Security Administration, or if they receive veterans benefits, often if they're determined incapacitated to handle their own finances, they're assigned someone called a representative payee that receives those benefits for them and manages the accounts. One of the things that we've recommended in past reports is that the federal government figure out a way to share information more directly with the courts on situations where they already know that a representative payee may not be fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities and might not make a very good guardian. We think it would be helpful if the state courts would know about those individuals so they could avoid appointing them as guardians.
And how does guardianship differ from power of attorney?
Power of attorney is something that is much more easy to achieve. An individual can appoint someone to have power of attorney over their finances and their other doings, and It can be accomplished through a notary public, and one of the things that we learned in this work was that power of attorney can be improperly obtained without the knowledge or permission of the individual, and it can also be more easily be abused. There are fewer controls on the backgrounds of the kind of people that might have power of attorney, and we've found a number of cases where that power has been abused.
In the report, continuing to talk about power of attorney, you share an idea for how the federal government could help states deal with this power of attorney issue. Can you talk about that recommendation in a little more detail, or that suggestion?
Yeah, there's a unit that develops model laws, and in this particular case, they have a model power of attorney law that they've suggested. And we have a couple different ways that we think the federal government could help with that. The Administration on Aging is actually doing training through one of its contractors to help states figure out ways to implement this type of model law or something like it. And the advantages of a law like this is it has built-in controls to try to rein in people who might be abusing their power of attorney privileges. For example, there might be a situation where there would be two people that would be sharing some responsibility, so one could oversee the other. There's also types of suggestions for what kinds of checks to do before you appoint someone as power of attorney.
Thanks for that. We have a question here over email from Scott. He asks whether criminal background checks on non-familial caregivers make a difference.
Well, as I said earlier, background checks are not a panacea. They're not a guarantee, but they certainly are a good place to start. And one of the things that we've learned is that their background checks are more effective when they are conducted at different levels of government. And by that I mean that there are criminal databases that are at the state level and at the federal level, and there's also information at the local level. So in order to have a thorough background check, it would be advisable to be able to cover all of those different levels of criminal databases. It's possible for someone to move from one state to another and not be found in the state's database, but be present, have their crimes be present in the federal database.
Thank you. The report seemed to break it down by efforts to prevent abuse and then efforts to address it after the fact.
Right.
Can you talk in particular about prevention and some of the ways that agencies are trying to prevent this before it happens?
Right. Well, I think, the first thing about prevention is that prevention is really the best answer to this. It's very, very hard, as I said earlier, to recover funds when they have been lost, or in the cases of international or interstate scams, it's very hard to bring those people to justice. So the most important thing that we've mentioned for prevention is public awareness and public education. And we think the federal government is very well positioned to be able to lead a campaign like this. When we talk to state and local agencies, they said, yes, we think public awareness is really important, but we really don't have the resources to do this. Our budgets have been cut, and we're pretty much spending all of our time and resources in just trying to cope with the problems that we're dealing with now. On the federal level, what we found was that all of the 7 agencies that we identified all had some type of public education effort, but it was specifically focused on their mission. And we believe that if there was a more coordinated effort across these different agencies, it would be more efficient, first of all. And secondly, we think it would be more effective if it was done centrally or coordinated at least centrally by the federal government, so that it would have a much wider reach.
Then on the sort of flip side, I guess, of that, with prevention on one side and response on the other, can you sort of give the same background in terms of how different agencies respond?
Well, the response, there's a couple different things that we were talking about in the response section, and one was the international and interstate crimes, and I've already talked a little about that, so maybe I can talk a little bit about banks right now. One of the things that we found was that banks can be a very, very important resource for identifying potential financial exploitation and reporting it, and also providing evidence if needed. And this is really very useful for older adults because many older adults continue to go into their local banks and have a relationship with the people in their banks. And it's not unusual for a bank teller to know the person personally, and they would be in a good position to know, oh, this person is withdrawing very significant or large amounts of money that they haven't done in the past, or they're accompanied by someone that I haven't seen before, and maybe they're feeling a little bit of pressure or indicating that they're feeling some pressure as they withdraw funds. So we think the banks can be a very valuable resource in helping to both prevent and address elder financial exploitation. I do want to say one more thing about the banks, and that's that we found that a number of banks do some training on being able to identify the types of situations that I was talking about. But we think that there could be more done in that area, and that's one of the recommendations we made in this report. And we also noticed and heard that many banks are reluctant to provide information because they have this sort of tension between their belief that they're there to serve the customer and protect their privacy, and at the same time they may have a feeling that something is going awry with this person's banking practices. And sometimes banks believe that they are prohibited from sharing this type of information because of federal privacy laws. And we have determined that the federal privacy laws don't prevent banks from sharing that type of information with adult protective services and law enforcement agencies. And that's another one of the recommendations that we made in this report, is that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau spend some time helping both to develop more training programs, but also to helping assure banks that it's okay for them to release that information.
You mentioned recommendations in this report, and there's also a recommendation that deals with requiring the victim's age in complaints. Can you elaborate on that?
Right. There are a couple different federal databases that give us some indication about the extent of this problem. But both of these databases, one is through the Federal Trade Commission, and one is in Treasury, and it is the financial, FinCEN, yes, thank you. And so both of these databases are broader than elder exploitation. They collect crimes on many different types of both anything from internet crimes to potential financial crimes, and many things are reported to them. And one of those databases is starting to collect information on whether that type of suspected crime or complaint involves older adults, and we are recommending that the other database also take steps to do that. We think that will help us to be able to get a better feel about the extent to which these complaints are involving older adults. And anytime we have more information, that's going to allow the federal agencies to have a better handle on the types of crimes that are committed and patterns that are involved, different jurisdictions that are involved, and that will help them with both prevention and response efforts.
We have a question here from Carol, came in over email, and she asks, what can individuals do to help affect change and stop exploitation?
Good question. One of the things that's important is to pay attention, and if you see something that you think is exploitation, refer it, report it. The Adult Protective Services agencies in any area are the places to start with any type of suspected elder abuse. And in addition to that, of course, you can go to local law enforcement agencies as well. One thing to remember, if you're reluctant, is that most states have a provision in law that gives people some kind of assurance that if they're reporting in good faith, they will be held harmless for that, so that if you report something and it turns out not to be exactly what you thought, you will not be held liable for that. Most states have protections like that in place.
I think that's really helpful, and I think probably a good place to leave it for this chat. I want to thank you, Kay, for taking the time to sit down with us
You're
and
welcome,
answer
and
these
thank
questions.
you for such good questions.
Yes, they were great questions. Thanks to everyone who submitted questions over email. This is, I believe, our 5th chat that we've done. We're looking to, improve the format as we go. So if you have suggestions or feedback about how we can do that, if you could send those in to AskGAOLive@gao.gov, we would really appreciate it. For more from the Government Accountability Office, you can always go to gao.gov. You can follow us on Twitter. USGAO is our handle, or on Facebook, facebook.com/USGAO for daily updates on our work. And thank you again for tuning in. We hope to see you here next time.
Thank you.